So what's the answer? There's a number of ways to solve the problem. First is that we need to get rid of the sole parents' pension. Mothers who are collecting the pension now can keep it, but after tomorrow, no one gets it. The second is that we need to create jobs for these low-income working class individuals. Inevitably, those jobs will be low-skilled and low-wage. And the only way to create those jobs is to introduce some more competition in the labour market. If a worker wants to work at a job which has a collective agreement on wages, made by a union with an employer, that's fine. If he wants to work at a wage for less than that collective agreement, he's free to do so. It's his choice. There's no other means of creating low-wage and low-skilled jobs. The minimum wage in Australia for a full-time worker is over $28,000 a year. Between ourselves, most white trashers are not worth that amount of money. By eliminating the sole parents' pension, we'll create a work ethic and a more responsible society where men marry women and work to support them and their children. Suffice to say, we need these solutions. Otherwise, we'll see more crime, more welfare dependency, more urban squalor. Immigrants will end up taking the low-income manual jobs that blue-collar Australians won't. Already that's starting to happen. 70% of the taxi drivers in Brisbane are Indian immigrants, and that's a statistic which would be unthinkable 20 years ago. So far, we've considered two of the major problems responsible for Australia's decline today. What's the third? It's one that's going to make life more difficult here in the future, and I'm talking about green taxes. Now, I don't want to get into the stale old debate as to whether or not global warming is happening or not. I want to look at some of the negative implications of policies which aim to tackle global warming. Firstly, let's take a look at the fundamentals of green ideology. The first tenet is Greens don't like technology. The green ideology is that man should interfere with nature. The interference with nature is a sin. All of man's development since the time of the Industrial Revolution is sinful. We need to turn the clock back to the time before the Industrial Revolution, when we lived in harmony with nature, instead of interfering with it and attempting to subdue, control and direct it. The electricity needs to go, so do cars, trucks, trains and motorbikes. Ideally, we should move out of the cities into the countryside and live off the land like our ancestors. For transportation, we should use horses. To light our homes, we should use candles. That's the green ideology. You can imagine then how they took to the global warming theory when it came along. The Greens took to it like ducks to water. Theorists of global warming say that man's interference with nature, including the logging of trees and the use of electricity, is going to bring a global disaster. The Earth will heat up and the polar ice caps will melt and inundate us, washing us and all our wickedness away like some biblical flood. As a theory, it was tailor-made for the green ideology. The Rudd Labor government has swallowed global warming hook, line and sinker. It wants us to stop using electricity. The way to do that is to penalise electricity companies by making it more expensive for them to operate. The problem is that those companies will pass on those costs in the form of higher electricity bills. Last year, the Rudd government wanted to introduce an emissions trading scheme, which would, among other things, drive up electricity prices into the stratosphere. In November last year, the New South Wales Energy Minister, John Robertson, said that electricity bills would rise by 30% by 2013 because of the emissions trading scheme. The New South Wales Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal said that country households and businesses will face a 60% increase in power bills, and a 50% of that rise was due to the scheme. The figures are pretty much the same for the other states and territories across Australia. Luckily for us, the legislation was blocked in the Senate last year, but that won't stop Rudd from trying again in 2010. So what's the problem with high electricity prices? Shouldn't we be encouraged to abandon electricity and get back to nature? The problem is that electricity now is not a luxury, it's a necessity of life. Imagine a country which has electricity prices, high electricity prices, brought about by high green taxes. Air conditioning becomes unaffordable for old age pensioners. A heatwave strikes and thousands of pensioners die of heat exhaustion and dehydration. Unlikely, you say? Well, that's exactly what happened in France in 2003, when 15,000 French pensioners died in 40-degree heat, which is standard temperature during the Australian summer. Pensioners in France couldn't afford air conditioning because of green taxes designed to punish electricity consumption. The same deaths will occur here in Australia if Rudd gets his way. Now that's one example of green legislation having a tragic consequence. Another one close to home. was the Australian bushfires of 2009, which killed 173 Australians. Now, Australia is a hot, dry country, prone to bushfires, but green legislation prevented many property owners from clearing trees and shrubs from around their homes and burning off vegetation to create fire breaks. At the Royal Commission into the cause of the 2009 bushfires, Liam Fogarty, Assistant Fire Chief at the Department of Sustainability and Environment, revealed that fuel reduction burns were down to record levels before the bushfires broke out. His department had only burned off 150,000 hectares a year in the past 3 years. In the 1980s, his department burned off 3 times that amount. He estimated that a burn-off buffer around a town the size of Anglesey could cut fires by 80%. So the Victorian government's green policy turned Aussie homes into fire traps. That's how it goes in rugs Australia. If you're a white trash, you're allowed to leave plenty of junk on your front lawn. Broken pieces of furniture, old toys, empty beer bottles are the rest. But if you're a property owner, you're allowed to chop down your own trees. Now, no one wants to denude the Australian landscape and turn our bushland into desert. But cities like Melbourne and Sydney were founded on cleared land. The entire country of Australia was built on felled trees. First settlers interfered with nature on a massive scale. The result was that they built the most beautiful country in the world. It's so beautiful that hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Chinese, Indians and Muslims will do anything to move here. So we need to save Australians from dying in bushfires. We need to save them from paying huge electricity bills. What's the answer? We need to roll back the taxes and regulations that are designed to stop Australians from using electricity. We need to give individual Australian property owners the right to clear excessive bush and scrub for their land. One by one, we can start rolling back the green taxes and regulations, which make our everyday life more difficult, more expensive than it needs to be. That's all for now. Thank you for being with me, and I hope you tune in to the next instalment of Nationalist Radio.